Okay, so we're back for our final hour. Again, we'll continue on with the device management side of it. So in summary, what we've done so far is we've effectively taken a device, standalone device, we've joined that to Azure AD. That has then handed off to Endpoint Manager and Intune. That has then basically run through MDM, so compliance, configuration policies. Then it's handed off to MAM to do protection policies and configuration policies. So what I want to show you here, if I can get it to work, so let me show you. Hopefully it won't take too long. So here's my machine here. This is on the one that I enrolled here. So if I do a search for, not Adobe, you'll see that there's no Adobe on here at all. All right, so it's just going to look up the web. So what I'm going to do now is I will show you how to push out a package. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to apps. Okay, I'm going to go to all apps here and I'm going to add an app. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select a Win32 app down the bottom here, right? So Windows 32 app, all right, standard sort of app there, and follow through this bouncing ball. All right, so I'm going to select the app package. All right, so the idea here is the source file is going to come from, I think I can, I've got to download it. All right, so what I'll need to do is I will need to firstly go to the Adobe site here. I should have pre-staged this, but anyway, let's do this anyway. Step 2, why don't we do something different and make it Japanese or something? Step 3, that's fine. I will download that. Where's it going to stick it? It's going to stick it in downloads. That's fine. So I'm downloading the source file to deploy, right? So I've done that. And now what I'll need to do is upload that into the portal here. That's not what I want. That's not the file name I want. Let's have a look here. Oh, I've got a... Okay, sorry. What I need to do is I need to go out. That's why I shouldn't do this on the fly here. But basically what you'll need to do is you need to create what's called an app package file. So I just need to go to command prompt, cd cd downloads, I think it is. Hopefully this works. I wonder if it's the same file name. Probably not. So again, where is that file? All right, so probably not a good thing. I'll get this to work for you. I've got to, but basically what we do here is we create this application package file here. It embeds, or it sort of, what's the word? Embeds a number of settings in there in the environment. And then what it does, it'll uploads that into the portal. So uploads that Win32 app into the portal with, again, how to configure all the install. And then basically what it will do is it will then allow me to push that out to individual devices. So what I might do is get all of that working for you tomorrow, rather than trying to do it on the fly, because there is a little bit of setup that I've overlooked that I need to do. It's obviously not all on this virtual machine. So let's put that off until tomorrow. Apologies for that. And let's just continue on with what we've got here. I'll show you how to do that tomorrow for sure. Just let me get all the right bits on my virtual machine so that we're good to go, because I spun up the virtual machine today and obviously I'm missing some bits and pieces on it, which is annoying. So to continue on, apologies for that. To continue on, this is our overview. So the only thing that we haven't covered off is these endpoints. So these are so we've done everything in Intune. We've done the devices and the application in Intune. Now what we want to do is the endpoint manager security policies over here, right? So these ones are on the right-hand side there. Now you find those under endpoint security. you'll see there's AV, disk encryption, and so on. And the idea then is that we simply go in and create those policies. You'll see that again, we can target those policies to an operating system and also to a template. We'll cover this, and then we have individual settings inside that. So as always, let us go to the portal. I will show you where they are. Here is my endpoint security offerings. And here are these individual endpoint security policies here. So we have done Intune compliance policies, Intune configuration policies, Intune app protection policies, Intune app configuration policies, and potentially now we can also add these endpoint security policies. So if we go in, for example, and have a look at the attack surface reduction policies, and we go in and create a policy, very similar. Let's go in here and go Windows 10 and select the policy, ASR. Now, the thing you'll notice here is that at the moment with the endpoint security policies, they're largely targeted at Windows 10. There's a few with Mac, not many, but most of the endpoint security is targeted at Windows 10 devices. So create a policy. So let's call this Win 10 endpoint ASR. Go next. And once again here, you'll see that you can go in and set these individual ASR rules. Now, attack surface reduction rules are built into every version of Windows 10. You can enable them manually using PowerShell or group or local configuration policy. What ASR largely does is prevents child processes from launching. So if you have a email that is delivered in Word format, that then tries to launch a PowerShell or some other child macro process, your ASR is going to basically prevent that. So it's a really good way to prevent things like ransomware. So the idea would be is you'd go in and again set these to be enabled. You'll notice that you can also set it to audit mode if you want. Let's just turn one on, and then we would again apply that to an audience, apply that to a group or a set of devices. So let us go to this one, and that will then push that policy again down for us on top of all the other policies that we may or may not have done. All right. So if you have a look at AV, go in here, you'll see that you can create an AV policy, same sort of deal. In this case, we do get the Mac capability in this policy. Select the profile. So let's go into Defender Antivirus, go create, go in here and go Windows 10 endpoint AV and go next. And you'll see here we can now determine, cloud protection, any exclusions that we want for Defender, real-time protection, how we want things to remediate, and so on. Exactly the same concept, and we apply it to a group, and then that then gets deployed to our devices and our users as well. All right. So again, the idea here is that we went in and did our Intune devices enrollment compliance configuration. Then we did our app protection and configuration. And then we can also now do, for Windows 10 at least, largely, our security AV, disk encryption, EDR, ASR, and so on. Now, the takeaway is that in all of this is that there is a lot of options that you can set. You can get very, very granular. You can really, really make lock down your machines, to the nth degree of whatever you want. Now, the challenge is, as you can probably appreciate now, is there's a lot of policies there. Okay, lots and lots of policies, lots of options. What are the best options? What are the best practices? Well, glad that you've waited till the last session because it was worth the wait. Because Microsoft gives us now a number of security baselines. Now, these baselines are typically targeted at Windows 10 as a start. I'm sure they are in the roadmap for iOS and Android, but the Windows 10 baselines are also available here. So if you go in and have a look at them, you'll see that there are a number of different versions. Now, what that means is that Microsoft will release updated versions over time and allow you to upgrade those to the newer baselines as they come out. So, again, much easier to show you. So in this same area, you'll see up the top here, I've got the option for baseline policies. You'll see I've got a baseline for Windows, for Defender for Endpoint, Edge, and Windows 365. So if I go into the baseline for Windows 10 here, you'll see that at the moment there is only one profile. These are the best practices settings from Microsoft. When a new profile appears, when Microsoft releases a new update, it will appear in here and you can upgrade any existing policies that you have. But let's go in and create a new one here, same sort of deal as before. So let's call this Win 10 baseline and put in the option here and go next. Now, think of this a bit like a settings catalog. These are all the settings, okay, for Windows 10. But the difference here is if we look inside any of these options are already configured to Microsoft's recommended best practice. So the baseline is a unique policy that has individual settings across all the device options and also includes the best practices setting for those options from Microsoft. So the idea would be is you could basically take this baseline policy, make no changes to it, go in and apply it to your Windows 10 user base, and that would then apply that baseline and all those settings to all of your machines and lock them down to Microsoft best practices. Now, when you look at things like the Essential 8, the CISA, all those different options, the majority of settings conform to those. So if you need to conform to that, again, apply the baseline settings. Now, if you do need to go in and make any changes, so a really good example here is for SMB, is if we go into our friend BitLocker, you'll see there's an option here is to block write access to removable data drives. Okay, so if you've ever had that, is when you put a USB stick into your machine, it pops up and says, this hasn't got BitLocker. You can read it, but you can't write to it because it hasn't got BitLocker on it, and that can be very frustrating for our user environment. So again, you may want to go in here and modify this baseline from the recommended standards to suit your particular environment. You can do that, save that, and then that update will be pushed down to those workstations. So the baseline is a great place to start. You can modify it. Now you'll notice here that when another version or an updated profile, a version is available, I can simply select the one I created here, select the change, the change version number, and I can now accept two options. So if there was another version available, you'll see that I can update the policy and leave any of my existing settings in place, or I can overwrite my existing policies with all the new settings, regardless of what I've already customized. So at the end of the day, the best practice recommendation from me is going to be implement the baselines first, because they are going to cover off 90% of what you need to cover off out of the box. They are also going to be easier to update, and they're already at Microsoft best practices levels. So you're not going to need to go in and reinvent the wheel and work out what the policies are. The majority of users, that's what's going to work for them out of the box. So for the Windows 10 fleet, I would recommend doing the baselines. So if we have a look at the Edge baseline here, so again, same sort of deal. Let's go in here and create Edge baseline. Now, one of the big advantages and one of the recommendations I have is you shouldn't, if you want a secure environment, the browser is going to be the second most likely app to be compromised after email. So therefore, you want to put the protection on the browser. Now, you're not going to be able to achieve that with third-party browsers. Now, Edge is 100% and more compatible with any other third-party browser. Right? It's got exactly the same functionality. It's largely built with the same engine, but it's going to give you this layer of control which you can't get with other browsers, okay? So I don't see any reason to be using any third-party browsers. I only use Brave, as you can see here, as another browser to give me more sessions. That's really the only reason that I use it. I would never use any other third-party browser. So you'll see here, I can go in here and enable different authentication schemes. I can go in here and also control the extensions that are put in here. I can, which ones are approved. So here, extension IDs that can be used, control which extensions cannot be used. So if I want, I can disable that so that the user can put in any extensions they want, or I can go in and say, look, I'm going to enable that, and then I'm going to control what extensions can be put in for the browser. Once again, go through the steps here, assign that to a user environment, and that will push down to my fleet. So to me, like I said, is that if you put your baselines in, or the baselines in with minor modifications for your Windows security for Windows 10, right? You put that one in, and then you put in the endpoint baseline one as well, and also the edge baseline. It's pretty much going to cover the vast majority of things you need to make your device fleet secure. Now, is there more that you can do? Absolutely. There's no question that you can have more security, but that is a great starting point. And you can then decide, okay, well, I want to go in and get more granular. I want to go in and set this configuration. So one of the things, for example, that the Windows 10 security baseline doesn't do, so let's go in here and have a look. All right, so let's go in here and have a look at our friend BitLocker again. You'll see here that BitLocker in Windows 10, it doesn't actually enforce BitLocker. Okay, so again, that's a compliance policy, but it's not telling you how to configure BitLocker, right? What level of encryption. Now, if you want to do that, you would come out here, go to disk encryption at the individual policy level, go in here and select Windows 10 and select a profile for BitLocker, go in and create, and let's call this Win10 Locker, and go next. And now you'll see that I get all the low-level capabilities. I can go in here and configure all sorts of options in here, all right, that I want, and get it exactly the way that I desire here. So at the end of the day here, like I said, there are lots and lots of options. There are far too many options to consider. I think, like I said, the best place to start is generally to look at the baselines as a quick and easy way to get compliant across the organization. We'll talk about the, my best practices probably tomorrow. We'll do a bit of a refresher, and I'll take you through a different path. But the path we've gone through today has been, looking at it from the top down. So doing Azure AD, the join, the handoff to Intune, the compliance, the configuration, application, security endpoints, and so on. So again, that's looking at it the traditional way. Tomorrow when we kick off, I will run through what I would recommend the best practice approach with a bit of a flow diagram I would use. But if you wanted to start and have a look at it, again, start with your Windows 10 devices and have a look at what the baselines do. Now, please do not go and implement them immediately overnight and turn them on all your tenants and enforce them. That will guarantee an unlimited amount of tickets and an unlimited amount of pain. So if you are going to enforce it anywhere, do it on yourself so you know what it's going to involve. So, for example, the BitLocker on USB drives tends to be a pain. If you do wireless projection devices, that generally needs an exemption. If you have third-party apps that need firewall exemptions, you're going to have to create a policy to do that. So again, my strongest recommendation here is to grow into the environment. Don't just turn it all on at once and expect it all to be fine, but certainly start with doing it yourself. So Brendan's asking about a hybrid join. This is where things get messy once again. Because where does the GPO finish and where does Intune start? My advice is to avoid hybrid join, get everything in the cloud, get rid of the local domain controller. You don't need a local domain controller. You've got to get rid of them. However, if you do need to do hybrid join, it just means there's going to be more work and more documentation you're going to have to understand where your group policy finishes and where Intune starts. Now, remember, when you do a hybrid Azure AD join, what it means is there are two unique sets of identities here. They are not the same. You are going to get an identity and a policy pushed down from the local domain controller, and you get an identity and a policy pushed down from the cloud thanks to Microsoft 365. Those two things do not talk to each other. They do not share authentication between each other. They may sync passwords and logins, but they are not issuing a single token from a single source. There are actually two tokens from two different identity sources, and that's where you get lots of challenges, because that means two sets of policies that don't really know anything about each other. So if you do hybrid join, right, be very, very careful and make sure you've got very, very good documentation, because it's very hard to determine where group policy ends and where Intune starts unless you are rigorous in your approach to pushing out those policies. And my advice to you strongly is you need to work to remove the local domain controller, especially in SMB. Okay, you really need to work to remove it, because it's simply not the future. It is simply limiting, and your life is going to be so much easier deploying stuff from the cloud in this environment. Windows 10 Azure AD join just makes life so much easier. Single login, single place, single policy, single integration. All right. Hybrid you can do, yes, but be prepared for pain is my answer to that. Any other questions? Again, we'll go into this and we'll review this when we revisit it tomorrow, and we'll revisit it more in a best practices approach and how I would implement it. But hopefully you've got coverage over what the concept is, how the process flows from end to end. There are lots of options, lots of settings in here, really, really powerful. And as I said, do things in a staged manner. Don't just turn it all on at once. And there is a lot of power in here, and that's where the value add is. Somebody needs to go in and configure this and make decisions about configuring the environment. Now, the advantages are generally most environments are going to be similar, so you can generally create the policy once, copy and paste, and import it and export it into other tenants, and they can have the same policy. So there's the value add. Once you work out what policies you want and how they're arranged, you can take that knowledge and take that implementation into another environment and you'll know you'll get the same sort of result there. So that's the big benefit of it. Do once, repeat many times. Okay, any questions on that endpoint manager run through from go to woe? And again, like I said, tomorrow we'll revisit it. We'll approach it in a slightly different manner with some best practice recommendations. But I do want to pause and make sure that everybody, again, is following and is able to understand the way that it's been broken down. All the options there. You don't have to know them in detail, but lots of options there. Okay, so some people do have to drop off. Okay, I understand that. Thank you very much. Appreciate the feedback. All right, well, if there are no questions, please give me a thumbs up or good to go, and I will continue on with a round out of today's session. Okay, so it looks as though everybody's probably overloaded. So let me just finish off with some things to consider here. Now, one of the other things to consider is that what you've seen here, all these policies are effectively just software. The direction that we're going with all of this stuff is that anything that can be automated will be automated. So things like the security, what's it called? The security, the security that Microsoft implements on tenants now out of the box to force MFA and also turn off things like basic auth, security defaults, that is already automatically enabled. If you haven't seen in Exchange, Exchange now also provides the capability to look at the effect of all the policies on your environment for each incoming email that you receive. So let me just pull up a tenant here that has data in it just to show you. So if I go into probably security, I keep always going the long way around. So let's go into this. Let's go into security. And I'll just give you an example of what I'm talking about, because the way forward is Microsoft's and AI is going to do a lot of this now. All right, they're going to take care of this automatically in the environment. So if I go into reports, hopefully, where'd it go? Go into reports. Come on, there we go. So if I go into reports and I look at the email collaboration reports and I look at the Mailflow summary here, right, you'll begin to see that there is a funnel, and what it's doing is it's telling me the effect of each one of my policies on my inbound emails. And you'll see in here that it's also looking at things like DNS and phish detection and all that sort of stuff. Now, if we also go and have a look at the policies, if you haven't seen already, under threat policies, you'll see that you've now got this preset security configuration policy. Now, these preset configuration policies apply best practices from Microsoft to the email environment. Okay, so there's a standard and a strict one. But also in here is a configuration analyzer. Now, that analyzer is a bit like a secure score. It's going to tell you, right, what needs to be done, and also it's going to give you recommendations. It's going to say, if you want a strict configuration, this is the recommendation. Now, if you go over to the right here, right, you'll see here that you can go in and basically apply the recommendation, right? So all I need to do is to select the one that I want and then apply the recommendation, and that will then update that configuration for me immediately. All right, so this is a really, really powerful capability, and at the moment it's currently just manual. But how much longer do you think it will be before Microsoft looks at this, or Microsoft enables capability for AI to look at this and sort of say, you know what, looks to me as though this would be a much better option for your environment than what you have set now. All right, so all of this best practices configuration, I think, is going to move into an automated capability. Now, a good example of that when it comes to Endpoint Manager and Intune is this cloud configuration. So again, if you haven't seen, there's a little button in here that allows you to commence this cloud configuration, this automated process. So what that looks like is, if I go in here, go back to home, you'll see there's a little button here, deploy Windows 10 in the cloud. So all I do is I push start, and it's going to tell me, it's basically a 2-button or a 3-button wizard. It'll say, look, this is what I'm going to do. Okay, so I go next, that looks good. And do I want to apply a device name template? What do I want to call this? So let's call this, I'll just give that a name. And what it's going to do is it's going to create these policies for me automatically. We go next. And I can also select the option to deploy my Microsoft options. I go next. Do I want to create a new group to deploy this to, or select an existing group? So let me select an existing group and go into my device users, which I already have. Go next, and you watch what it does. So I'm ready to go. Deploy, and it's going out and automatically creating all those policies and assigning them for me. Right, that's done. That's now deployed. Now, if I go and have a look at my devices and go in and have a look at my Windows devices and my configuration profiles, guess what? There are the policies that it's applied for me. So again, how much longer is it going to be until this is done in an automated way and the AI looks at it and says, you know what, this should be set on, we'll do it, we'll apply it. If it breaks or something fails, we'll roll it back for you automatically. So again, something to keep in mind here that is coming down the track. You can take advantage of it now, But my point here is automation, automation, automation. If you are doing things manually, if you are doing things the hard way, you will not survive. You cannot scale. You have to use the power of the machine to make your life easier. And that's probably going to require writing a bit of PowerShell, using Power Automate, or doing something. You simply cannot rely on punching in and using things in the interface. You just are not going to be efficient enough. All right, so my general recommendations for you as we wind up for today are maintain good documentation. That is going to save you in so many different ways, right? What are the policies called? Who's it applied to? What are the settings? It's super, super important to do that. The sooner you do it, the easier it's going to be, right? Maintain good documentation. Naming convention, as I mentioned, don't call everything test. Try and come up with, Win10 config policy name or whatever you want to call it. But come up with a standard naming convention so you can effectively look at the policy and know what it does, what it applies to, right? If everything's called the same name or it's called a random set of digits, very, very difficult to troubleshoot. Very, very difficult to troubleshoot. So again, when you do create a policy, take the time to fill in the right naming convention and also put in a good, basically a good description. All right. Apply the policies in rings. So what I mean by that is simply don't inflict all policies on every user immediately. Work out early adopters, work out, people who are ready for the change that you can do testing on, and then push it out to everybody, much like they do Windows updates, right? There can be unknown or unsuspecting results if you push out some policies that you may not expect. So a good example is we work with a partner who decided to enable, this security configuration. But guess what? That security configuration required a reboot. And when do you think it rebooted? Immediately that it applied. So again, you don't want that to happen to all your users. In the middle of the day, they will be very, very angry. So again, working on rings. My advice, as with conditional access, is also to have a break glass account. A break glass is an account which is not subject to any policies. It is very, very easy to overlook something and lock out the account you're using to configure your environment, and you're not going to get back in. Once the policy kicks in, you're not going to get back in. Same with conditional access. You always need a break glass account that allows you to get into and reconfigure or disable or delete policies that are needed. So again, everybody should have at least one break glass account that is well protected in whatever manner you choose, long passwords, alerting, whatever, but make sure you have an account which you can get in and reconfigure things if you happen to make a whoopsie, because otherwise it's going to be very, very painful for you. And as I mentioned, grow into your settings, right? Don't try and turn everything on immediately. Just start with some basic stuff to see how it works. Now, if you want to get into this, I would advise that you go and get yourself a secondhand Windows machine, a VM, a old PC, get an old secondhand Windows phone, iOS phone, Android phone, and use that to do testing on. That's how I do it. You just have old devices, you then spin them up, you can erase them, you can delete them. What happens if I wipe it? Whoops, made a mistake, doesn't matter. There are demo tenants out there, so cdx.transform.microsoft.com. You can spin up, or you as a partner have access to demo tenants, which can be E5, Microsoft 365 Business Premium. So there are plenty of access to demo tenants. You don't have to use your own production environment first time through, and I wouldn't recommend that. And when you've done the demo, then again, put it in your own production environment. The way that I learnt this stuff is I inflicted it on myself. Like I said, copying and pasting information with Windows Information Protection, very painful at the wrong time. So knowing how to do that and what's appropriate, and to counsel users who may think it's a good idea, but hang on, the practicalities are this, this, and this. All right. So again, have a think about that and come up with a value add around, right? We've done this for ourselves. That's the best way to understand how it will work in a customer's environment. your configuration is never complete. There'll be new updates, new patches, new versions. Windows 11 you can push out using Intune, more applications, more security settings. You need to look at this as an ongoing opportunity. That means that the customer is going to need you to be constantly working with them to get the most out of this tool. There's the opportunity. Okay, this is an ongoing engagement. It's not a close the ticket event where we're finished and we're done and we walk away and it's all over. Right? You need to look at this as this could be a 3-month, 6-month initial engagement to get it working, to get it tied down, to get it exactly the way we want it, to understand how the policies work. It's not an overnight thing, right? This is the value add, right? That's what you should look at. You should look at this is not a one-shot deal where I do it, run a script, and then I'm done, right? That's only the beginning. And there's the opportunity. There's the revenue that's been presented to you. And as I said, automation, automation, automation. PowerShell, Power Automate. So, for example, there was a recent blog post out there that showed you how to use a user could fill in a form, Microsoft form, to get a request a Windows 11 update on their device. That was then approved or sent to an approval by a manager. The user's account was then moved into a group inside Azure AD, which then had a policy applied to it to push out Windows 11 update to them. And that was all automated. Okay, that's the future. That's how it's going to work. That's the thing you need to focus on, not just deploying the infrastructure, not just writing policies for the infrastructure. Where's the value add? So putting that Power Automate on top of everything after the fact. So some resources for you there, plenty out there. You'll get access to the recordings and the slides after the fact. More information from me, again, lots of stuff about Endpoint Manager in my blog. Also, we'll talk about GitHub probably a bit more tomorrow, what's in there that you can take advantage of. Podcast training courses, cloud community for this sort of stuff day in and day out. If you do have those questions beyond today, and if you want, feel free to contact me, director@ciaops.com, also on the Twitters. So I think for today, that's pretty much all that I have. I will open it up to any questions that we have on anything that we've discussed today. I will also provide a caveat that some of the stuff we will be talking about potentially and following up on tomorrow. So I may defer some of that till then, but are there any questions? Will we have access to today's recording? I wonder where I've seen that question before. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the session, the recording will be made available to you after the fact, once it has completed all the sessions, and it will be made available to you from Ingram. So go and speak to the good people at Ingram about obtaining that. I would suggest that it will not be available until early next week, but it will be sent out to you. And if you don't receive it, then again, speak to the good people at Ingram. Any other questions? So George has confirmed that the recordings will be available early next week. He's the man to speak to. I'm sure he'll put his email address in the chat after I suggest it so that you can contact him. But again, next week, you would be expecting these resources. Thank you, everybody. Hopefully I've covered off everything. It is an involved topic, I appreciate, but there are some core, something we haven't covered here, but I will point out is, if you need to have good skills in Azure AD. You really need to understand identity. If you don't understand identity, you need to go and invest and understand identity and on-prem and how Azure AD works and the tokens and conditional access. Yes, there's a lot, but this is the new world, right? And the core of it is Azure AD, right? You really need to have a very good, clear understanding of how identity is managed and works in the cloud, because that is the basis for everything Microsoft 365 and everything Azure as well. So aside from what we've talked about here with Endpoint Manager, there are core things around, Azure AD, Exchange Online, SharePoint. There is an important skill set to make sure that you are across on all of those. Okay, any other questions? Any other general questions? Happy to answer any other questions, not necessarily on this topic if you want. All right, so with that, why don't I stop the recording?